そうはいかないよ、エル。そこまでだ。
Ideally, when you write a story, a great way to immerse your audience is to help them understand the characters, whether through their actions, their tone of voice, or body language. And personally, I'm a sucker for stories that turn the understanding into a battle, a psychological battle, where the outcome can be decided before anyone even throws a punch. But depending on the medium, what's fascinating is how differently those battles can play out, especially if you compare anime to Western film. I've always noticed a curious difference, and I want you to see what I mean. Let's look at these two examples. On the left is an interrogation scene from The Dark Knight. This part actually comes directly before the more famous confrontation between Batman and Joker, but I specifically chose this scene because it perfectly illustrates what I'm talking about. Here, we have two hostages. Joker knows where they are. James Gordon is the head of police department and wants to save them. The purpose becomes obvious. Find the locations before time runs out. On the right is an iconic standoff scene from Death Note. Light Yagami is a high school student turned vigilante named Kira after he finds a notebook that can kill people with just their name. And L is a detective who wants to find Kira's identity and stop him. This scene is their first time meeting each other face to face. Let's start with The Dark Knight.
Evening, Commissioner.
The direction in this scene is very intentional. The room is barely lit, and the only thing we see is Joker's faint outline and a table illuminated by a single office desk lamp. What's being signaled here is that the interaction between these two will remain only at this desk. But on a meta level, this means that the acting has to carry this scene. Fortunately, for actors of this caliber, this is not an issue. As Gordon moves to sit in the chair, he wipes the imaginary dust from the table and begins collecting his thoughts. Whatever just happened is startling him, and you can hear that he's out of breath. And while the commissioner is trying to project control, the cracks already showing.
Harvey Dent never made it home.
Of course not.
What have you done with him?
Me? I was right here.
On the other hand, Joker's demeanor is almost playful. His words and tone of voice make it clear he's the mastermind behind the plan without actually saying it.
Who did you leave him with? Your people? Assuming, of course, that they are still your people.
It's obvious here that Joker's taunting affects Gordon very deeply. As the perspective changes, we can see Gordon's nostrils flare and his lips twitch. At this moment, Joker's in full control, and he knows it.
Predicament. Where is he? What's the time?
So Gordon gives up.
If we're gonna play games.
The good cop, bad cop routine.
The lights suddenly flash, and after Batman reveals himself in a pretty blunt manner, the whole room is illuminated, which is a hint that the playground has expanded. In the next couple of minutes, we're supposed to believe that the good guys finally have the upper hand, but despite the apparent physical disadvantage, Joker disagrees.
Right to be. You have nothing to threaten me with.
And the tension keeps rising. Now let's take a look at this scene in Death Note. It takes place at the entrance ceremony of a university that both Light and L got into after receiving perfect scores. But L's sole reason for coming here is to investigate Light, and after finally getting a chance to speak face to face, L makes his move. The background blurs out, and the colors drain into red and blue, almost like the world itself is reacting to this reveal. There's barely a moment of silence as we listen to each thought running through their minds. This is what anime does a bit differently. Instead of letting you read the character's intentions through performance, it directly lets you inside their mind. We even hear Ryuk's opinions, who at this point has just been a neutral observer. This is the literal definition of a psychological battle. Now, if you grew up watching Western movies, the first clip probably felt more natural, because it mirrors how we experience tension in real life. A common writing technique that is used here is what we all know as show, don't tell. We use faces, body language, tone of voice, and even silence to understand what other people feel. So to go from that to scenes where much of the tension plays out through narration rather than movement can feel a bit jarring. But as someone who grew up watching both anime and movies, the second clip doesn't feel strange at all. In fact, it feels right. Why is that? Why does a story that tells instead of shows still feel immersive? That's what I want to explore. Part of the answer lies in where these two mediums come from. Western cinema grew out of theater and photography, both obsessed with realism, with showing truth through movement and expression. You don't tell the audience someone's angry, you show it through a clenched jaw or a slammed door. Anime, though, evolved from a different tradition, from manga, where static drawings had to somehow speak. Inner thoughts, emotions, and narration weren't just optional, they were essential tools to tell a story. So when anime inherited that language, it kept that emphasis on internal expression. That's why what feels like over-explaining in a Western film often feels natural in an anime. It's not just a stylistic choice, telling is in its cultural DNA. But to really show what I mean, let's start with when it completely falls flat, when telling actually breaks immersion. Like early on in Attack on Titan, when Armin sees everyone around him die, we hear him describe what we're already seeing, that he's helpless and terrified. Or later, when Eren heroically sacrifices his life to save him, we hear Armin's breakdown, and again, how useless he is. Not even 2 minutes later, again in a flashback, and then again in the next episode. We get it, you're scared. Here, the telling stops being a storytelling tool. Instead of pulling us deeper into a character's mind, it just tells us exactly what's already obvious. And over-explaining emotions is just one example of misusing this tool. In the first episode of Sword Art Online, Alicization, after some recent world building and combat, the main character wakes up from the VR world, meets his friends, and then proceeds to, I'm not exaggerating, dump almost 10 minutes of exposition in a cafe. And it's not just that these scenes are badly written, no, it's also that they completely disengage you. When the story tells you everything outright, it removes the viewer's ability to interpret, and interpreting is how a viewer engages. But here, instead of thinking, what's this character going to do, you start thinking, okay, I get it. Can we move on? And the moment that thought crosses your mind, the spell breaks.
Meruem, king of the ants. You really don't have any idea, do you? You know nothing of the bottomless malice within the human heart.
Just then, the king felt true fear for the first time.
You see, the problem isn't telling itself. In fact, when used with intent, it can pull you deeper into a story than visuals ever could. Take Death Note for example.
しかしキラは負けず嫌い
Compared to Attack on Titan, in the standoff between Light and L, we're not being told what we can already see. Instead, we're being shown what isn't visible. Every calculation, move, even every moment a character doubts themselves, it's all there in their thoughts. Without knowing what's on their minds, the tension would still exist, sure, but how they strategize and adapt would be invisible. It's why despite narration being the focus of the story, it still keeps us gripped and excited to find out what's next. But directly giving access to a person's thoughts is just one way to tell a story. Take the Monogatari series. The story is almost entirely driven by dialogue, and sometimes as a viewer, it can feel like it's drifting in all directions. That's why this anime takes a deliberate, almost literary approach, grounding key moments in something we all understand, language. Words appear on screen, merge with the visuals, or fill the silence entirely. Since the animation can be sparse, the narration transforms into its own visual language. Emotion and tone are expressed through rhythm and phrasing instead of movement. The telling here isn't replacing the showing, it is the showing. A method so unconventional, the series is widely considered revolutionary. Speaking of revolutionary, the isekai series Re:Zero not only turned the genre on its head, it also changed how isekai protagonists are written. Whereas a typical show would create a boilerplate character for self-inserts, Subaru is shown as his own character, with his own strengths and flaws, and it's his inner monologue that truly helps the viewer immerse themselves into the story. Since we view the world through Subaru, a lot of the story elements that can't be fully conveyed through animation are instead told to us through his thoughts. His deep trauma from repeatedly dying is shown to us through his desperate and helpless pleas. His lack of thoughts during unexplainable events shows his confusion. And his bigoted, one-sided conclusions remind us that he's an unreliable narrator. It's integral to the story. Whether a story shows or tells doesn't matter nearly as much as what it's trying to make us feel. If Western films teach us to look, to read a face, a silence, or a gesture, then anime teaches us to listen, to the inner voice and thoughts that never leave our heads. And maybe that's why both can feel so real. because between what's seen and what's said, we find ourselves somewhere in the middle. Thanks for watching. If you made it here and enjoyed the video, check out my previous video. And of course, leave a like and comment to help the algorithm.